Of course, the newspapers were all about Artemis. The Science Times had a whole fold out of Artemis and the rocket. Interesting, they have this diagram of Artemis, but they show the crew capsule with the seats, but they didn't show where the toilet is. It's actually like right next to that storage cabinet in the corner. There is where the toilet is, but they didn't show that. But but yeah, the whole thing was all about Artemis. It had showed the the orbital path for Artemis 1 and 2. Talked about the Canada participation in Artemis, and this was interesting. This isn't officially science news, but this is sort of like Artemis news. They had this article about the suits and why are the suits orange. A lot of people have a hard time with the orange suits, saying, why aren't they white like with Apollo? Well, they're not white because they're not EVA suits. They're not intended to be in the sunlight, but it says that the color has its own striking history, officially known as AMS Standard 595 color # FS 12197. It's such a, just kind of rolls off the tongue, such an eloquent name. According to the U.S. federal government standard created for paint, International Orange is described by Merriam-Webster as, quote, a vivid reddish orange, deeper than safety cone orange or fluorescent orange, and specifically meant to stand out against ocean and blue skies. And they go on to say that International Orange has a long familiar history in the maritime usage. So in the 1930s, Irving Morrow chose it for the Golden Gate Bridge to better make it stand out against the water in the sky. And the Navy adopted it for airplane fuselage markings. In 1947, same year Chuck Yeager's International Orange Bell X-1 rocket plane broke the sound barrier. So yes, the X-1 was also International Orange, again, so that they could see it with binoculars against the blue sky. Yeah. They also explained in a video that the contrasting blue trim, you can see there, they're orange, but they have the blue trim with the harnesses and collar for the helmets and stuff. But they said that the matching blue trim is also iridescent, so that under lighting, like if it were a nighttime landing and they had to see the astronauts in the water or something like that shining a light, they would, not only would the orange stand out against the blue, but also all of the trim would glow very brightly under regular lighting. History about the International Orange, and also an interesting sub-article about keeping astronauts safe. This is one of those special zipline gondolas. There's 4 of them, one for each astronaut, on the launch tower, so that if they have to do an emergency egress off the tower to get away from the rocket, they can hop into these 4 gondolas and be sprinted away to an area, far away from the pad there, where there are waiting vehicles to speed them away from the area in the event of emergency. I saw, old film of the Apollo era where they didn't have the gondola. In the Apollo era, the astronauts would simply latch a harness onto their suit, and they would just zip line down that cable. No gondola at all. That had to be a hell of a thrilling ride. And I did see too that when they got to the bottom, that there's quite a drop. That there had to be people there. But the article says here that we will never get the risk down to 0 in this line of work, said Jared Isaacman, NASA administrator. Yeah, he says, I once joked that every lesson has ever been learned in human space flight has been rolled into Orion, said Weissman, commander of Artemis II. He said in a NASA podcast that every cable is a bit thicker and than it needs to be, and every computer is more redundancy than it needs to. So yes, everything was overdone and everything worked great. And it also says, yeah, NASA has the emergency escape system on the launch pad for pre-lift-off issues. That's these gondolas here. Resembles gondolas of a ski lift designed for the crew to quickly get to the ground. 4 baskets, each the size of a small SUV, can whisk the astronauts down a set of cables to the perimeter of the launch pad. You can also then board emergency vehicles. And you're thinking, well, if each gondola is the size of an SUV, why do they need 4 of them? Well, for redundancy, but also there's a white room crew there too. And if something were to happen while they were trying to ingress, they'd all have to get off the launch pad. So it wouldn't be just the 4 astronauts, but it'd be the whole support crew. They'd all have to be getting into the gondolas, so there'd have to be room for all of them, yada yada. They didn't need to use it. Everything went fine. Yeah, it was, just want to show you this. It was, yeah, it's been Artemis all week. The Philadelphia Inquirer had the big, they've been doing write-ups. The local paper, cover the Wall Street Journal. Yeah, Wall Street Journal did a whole article. Wall Street Journal, they usually don't cover science stuff, but yeah, they, talked about the small glitches on the early day. The smell in the toilet, which Christina Cook fixed, and they were all so grateful for her plumbing skills and getting rid of the stink. Also, yeah, this was the other thing about Jared Isaacman's, did a big speech about the ambitious stuff that they're going to do. He announced some very ambitious goals in a press conference that they had. He said there will be an evolutionary path to building humanity's first permanent surface outpost beyond Earth, and they're talking about the moon base. Again, I'm like, where's the money going to come for this? This Congress is not going to float the bill for a moon base, and NASA doesn't have the budget. I mean, now he did say that some of the programs that have been put on hold last year are back on this year. He announced a list off the top of my head. I'm not going to quote, but some of them that had been thought to be maybe canceled or in permanent limbo, he said some of them are going to launch next year. But yeah, it all comes down to the money. So it's like, even if Jared Isaacman is, going to make promises on camera, if Congress doesn't allocate the budget, it's not going to happen. This has been the problem of NASA for decades. Yes, Mr. Isaacman said that the pace of Artemis missions would speed up from 1 every few years to twice a year after Artemis 5. Again, that's if we get to Artemis 5. Those rockets, they cost, the actual cost per launch for the Space Launch System per rocket, just for SLS. So it says plans for a moon base would proceed in 3 phases, Mr. Isaacman said. The first would seek to replace one-time bespoke missions with a templated approach that would generate significant learning through experimentation, whatever that can possibly mean. Because at this point, we're talking about 150,000 kilograms of payload on the surface. To work on the Gateway, a small space station that had been planned to orbit the moon has been suspended. So, no Gateway. This is the thing, if they don't build the Gateway, how are they going to build a lunar base? This is all going to be like single shots. Because the whole idea of having the Lunar Gateway was to make it possible to shuttle between the Earth and the Moon. It was all about hardware. The proposed nuclear-propelled spacecraft, the Space Reactor 1 Freedom, would be robotic and demonstrate fast. Yeah, you talked about that they want to do that, the nuclear-powered spacecraft. There's always been a thing about putting anything like nuclear-powered into space. It isn't about having nuclear-powered spacecraft. That's not the issue. The issue is getting it into space, because anything goes wrong from the ground to orbit, you got a problem if you've got a nuclear reactor on that spacecraft. That's why it's always a nail-biter whenever you got plutonium on board a rocket. So anyway, we'll just have to see. They're making big promises. Another interesting thing, this is sort of like the flip side, and I didn't talk about it during the live casts, but it really bears talking about. Americans' attitude towards human spaceflight is blasé. And, while I was doing the 5 marathon webcasts of the Artemis mission, so many people in the chat were like, oh, this is like amazing, the whole world and everything. And people at NASA were like, billions of people are waiting for everything. And I was like, really? Are billions of people waiting for these messages? Are billions of people watching? Because I have a feeling that the internal numbers that NASA has for the actual number of people who are actually watching their streams, they're not going to publish that. But yeah, among regular people, I mean, I'm talking in America, where it's supposed to be really gung-ho, patriotic and everything, and we're all like, USA, USA. Even in America, the percentage of the population that actually even knew about the mission even happening, you'd be surprised how small that number is. I mean, I was in a restaurant talking with the waiter, having breakfast one day that I was doing it was the day that I was going to do a broadcast, so I figured I'd treat myself to a prepared breakfast rather than just having my usual banana and almonds. And I'm talking with the waiter, and they're saying, I said, how are you doing? How's your day going? They're like, I'm having a bad day and everything. And I said, I don't know what's going on with you, but, it might make you feel better to know that, like, right now, that, the 4 astronauts are going around the moon. And he was like, around the moon? What are you talking about? I said, Artemis 2 is going around the moon. He said, is that like a plane? I said, no. I said, this is the spacecraft. I said, there are 4 human beings who are in deep space. They are flying around the moon right now while we're having this conversation. And he was like, wow. I mean, he had never heard of it. And he was a young guy, but I realized, well, he probably represents a lot of his generation. I have a feeling that a lot of the young people who are on social media, that the whole idea of Artemis never even got into their feeds, because the algorithm makes their feeds so insulary that they, a lot of young people just choose to have no news on their feeds because the news is terrible and they don't want to see anything political, so they just turn off news. And so there's a very large contingent of the population, I would think a lot of younger people, who never even knew that Artemis even happened. I mean, for people my generation, it's got to be like the majority. I think most people over the age of 50 were following the mission at some point, or at least knew about it. But people who are in the generations where it's all phones, you'd be surprised how many of them were in the dark about the whole thing. It's I don't know. But this article is really about how Americans really just are not on board with the whole idea of manned spaceflight, human spaceflight, woman spaceflight, non-Apollo era kind of guy spaceflight. There was certainly a lot of comments to that. There's like, oh, look at this DEI. It's like Jesus Christ. Christina Koch proved it's like the battle of the sexes, with Billie Jean King. If you've seen the film version of that real life match, Christina Koch proved to everyone that women are great astronauts, competent, intelligent, great pilots. They handle the rigors of space flight, and they're not only just as capable of men for space flight, but I argue they've actually got an edge because they're just more on top of things and thinking ahead. So Christina Koch, tremendous example. I hope that young girls who see Christina Koch, I hope she does a lot of school appearances and stuff, and really trying to get the kids to get interested in spaceflight, because she is a great representative of the best of Americans in space. She's the, really represents the best of the astronaut corps. She's really up there. So I was so proud. But recent polls reveal that sending someone into the moon ranks very low in priorities for most Americans. It's true. Jared Isaacman had said in December that its astronauts have been living on the International Space Station for more than 25 years. It's true. And I had said this in previous videos that there are people in America who don't even realize that we have a space station. I had that conversation like a decade ago with a bunch of neighbors. We were outside. They were having a barbecue type thing. And it was just at twilight. The sun had just set, and it was in that kind of like dim blue horizon kind of point of the sunset. And we were looking east, so the sun was setting west. So we were looking at the darker side of the sky. And I looked up, and bright point of light, the ISS was flying right overhead. And it was right there. And I said to everybody, I said, wow, look, I said, it's the ISS. And they all looked at me like I had lobsters crawling out of my ears and said, what are you talking about? I said, right, look up there, look that dot. You see that dot? Everybody, look up, you see that dot? And everyone's like, yeah. I said, that's the ISS. And my neighbor, who, they're professional people. They're educated, college-educated professional people, says, what's the ISS? I said, it's the International Space Station. And there's this long pause. And they said, what space station? And I had to explain that at the time that for the last 15 years there's been a space station orbiting the Earth, and that there are 7 people up there working on that space station, and we're able to see it because its sunlight is reflecting off of the spacecraft, off the station, and we're almost in darkness, but the space station is in complete sunlight, so it's glowing very brightly, even though it's 250 miles up. Well, I mean, this is the thing. People who watch a channel like mine think that everybody knows about space flight and knows what's going on. But if you actually go out and talk to regular people and just ask them about, what do you think about the ISS? What do you think about Artemis 2? You're going to find a lot of people who are just going to say, what are you talking about? What's a space station? I've never heard of Artemis. Who's that? You'd be surprised. So the article says that when a Pew Research Center, nonpartisan think tank based in Washington, surveyed more than 10,000 American adults about space in 2023, this is a few years ago, it found that overall opinions of NASA remained high. This is 3 years ago. But when asked to rank the importance of 9 activities undertaken by NASA, most of the respondents regarded all of them as a top priority or important but lower priority. Some people did not support sending human astronauts to explore the moon, but it was next to last in importance. Yes, next to last in importance. So it's like literally the bottom of the barrel is sending humans back to the moon. And 41% said that it was not important for NASA and not worth doing at all. Yeah. Of the 9 activities, only send human astronauts to explore Mars scored lower. At the top of the list of what people want to see NASA do were to monitor asteroids and other objects that could hit Earth. Armageddon type stuff. Well, because of Armageddon, you got to get Bruce Willis up there, right? Followed by monitor key parts of Earth's climate system. And it's interesting that that's the top thing that people want NASA to do, and that's the top thing that the current administration has stripped out of the budget. They've canceled all the climate monitoring programs, shut down the climate monitoring satellites, gutted the climate monitoring agencies. So the majority of Americans support climate monitoring and that data, and the current administration has taken that specifically out of commission, probably permanently, because it's hard to rebuild that. Americans' blasé attitude towards human spaceflight is enduring. 5 years earlier, Pew asked the same questions, received almost the same answers. And this is nothing new because, when I do videos on my channel about Apollo stuff, and we're talking for the last 10 years, so many comments, particularly from young people who were not alive during the Apollo missions. The number one thing that people will comment about is, why did they stop? What's the conspiracy? Why did they say if they went to the moon, why would they just stop? They'd go a few times and then just stop. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. Why? Give me one good reason why they stopped going to the moon if they went to the moon. And it's like, well, all of us who were alive at the time know the answer very well. As soon as Apollo 11 departed from the moon, it was over. Public support was over. It was over. The Vietnam War was raging at full peak. There were economic problems. Nixon, was about to have his scandal after the re-election campaign. There were domestic issues, civil rights issues, assassinations in the late 60s. There was cultural upheaval. Distrust. Young people distrusted the older generations tremendously. There was a huge generational divide. And, after Apollo 11, and we're not even talking the time that the program ended with 17, we're talking with 11, when 11 came back and all the parades and everything were done, America as a culture was done with the moon. I mean, very famously in the film Apollo 13, they're broadcasting live, and they're surprised that the major networks, the ABC, NBC, CBS, they wouldn't even broadcast the live streams from space. They just simply didn't care anymore. And that was the sentiment across American culture. Americans were done. They thought, well, we spent all this money. Why are we continuing to go to the moon when we have all this problem at home? Now, regular Americans are saying, we have poverty, we have huge economic problems, we need to invest in our infrastructure, we need to spend this money here. That's what Americans were saying, like in 1970. But the Nixon administration said, well, no, we're just, what we really want to do, what we're going to do is we're going to take all that money that we've been spending on NASA and we're going to bomb the bejesus out of Cambodia. That's what we're going to do. And that's what they did. They wanted to, they closed down the NASA budget, moved everything over to the war in Vietnam. And 17, it was over. And even at the time, in the 1960s, it was actually, until Apollo 11 landed on the moon, it was a very slim majority of Americans, overall Americans, that even supported the Apollo program. It was a very slim majority. It was just barely over. Yeah, it says, right here it says, in July 1969, the month that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first astronauts to land on the moon, a thin majority, just 53%, even agreed that Apollo had been worth the money. And that was when the moon landing happened. So, there's this fallacy, this illusion that Americans were 100% behind the space program in the 60s and they're not now, and why can't we be like we were back then? Well, the reality is that we've never been behind the space program. At the time, during Apollo, leading up to Apollo 11, most Americans fought against spending all that money on the moon program. They didn't want it. They wanted it spent different ways. And the sentiment, it continues today. So it's nothing new at all. Yeah. Spending for the NASA budget, it peaked in 1966 at 4.4% of the federal budget, right? And then started dropping from there. In recent years, so we're talking like the last few years, it's accounted for just 0.5%, 0.5%, or less of that, of federal spending. So it's an infinitesimal amount of the budget. And it's been slashed since then quite significantly in the last 8-9 months. Even as Derek Isaacman announced these really grand goals for NASA in a press conference a few days ago just months ago, his boss, urged Congress to slash the budget, and Congress they're not on board with any of this. They moved trillions of dollars extra into defense spending, but NASA's puny few billions of dollars has been cut back tremendously. In a paper published in 2017, it observed that most people do not feel strongly about human spaceflight. A lack of public support for spending a lot of money on spaceflight has been a fundamental reality of NASA since its beginnings, Dr. Lanius said. It's not changing and probably not changeable in the predictive future. So, that, my dear friends, is the straight poop. Americans have never been in support of the space program, and they probably never will be. It's just us geeks, us nerds, that want it to happen and have pushed to have bucks for Buck Rogers. It's just been the nerds among us, the pilots, the rocket fans, the engineers, science geeks. We want it to go on, and it's only because of science geeks that it's even happened to begin with. Oh, and the Cold War, because we needed ICBMs to bomb the bejesus out of the Soviets. It's the only reason we had rockets to begin with. So that's the reality, people. That's the reality. So as far as landing on the moon, going to Mars, things like that, they're really putting the pressure on private firms to get that done. Interestingly, this week, SpaceX has very quietly applied to go public as a company, and it said that if the whole thing should go through and they get the IPO, the SpaceX will be the most valued company in history. And because, of course, Elon Musk has the largest personal share in SpaceX, he will become, without any question, the wealthiest living creature ever to live or who will live. And on the heels of that note, an article which I don't have here, it'll be in the Space News, so I'll talk about it later, that there has been a very recent and very dramatic crash in space tourism. The whole space tourism industry, with Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, they've stopped flying. In fact, it kind of just with all the other hoopla and everything with Artemis and Starship and everything, no one really noticed it, but space tourism is sort of over. Basically, there weren't enough billionaires in the world who had the courage or the desire to go into space, and they've pretty much sent them all. And there is no more waiting list for people who have the money to do a flight into space. So they've basically just shut down space tourism. I think Blue Origin said they're going on a 2-year hiatus. And Virgin Galactic said that they're planning on picking up the slack, although they really don't have any realistic timeline for getting their system, their new suborbital system up and flying. Work in the lab, go berserk in my lab. It's where I work. That's what you're watching. Friend love. That's what I'm doing. working at the bench.